Welcome to episode 166 of Stageworthy. I'm your host, Phil Rickaby. Stageworthy is a podcast about people in Canadian theatre featuring conversations with actors, directors, playwrights, and more. You know, I always say that if you like this podcast, you should tell someone about it because some of my favorite podcasts became my favorites because somebody I knew told me about them. And, you know, I want to take a moment to tell you about some of the other Canadian theatre podcasts that I love. Because let's face it, those of us who love it can't get enough talk about it. So I'm going to recommend 4 podcasts about Canadian theatre for you. First, Keith Thomasek's The Performers Podcast, Tyler Check's Let's Grab Coffee, Chelsea Johnson's Q to Q, and Kyla Musselman and Jen Thiessen's Tits and Teeth. And you can find them all where you get your podcast, and I listen to all of them. I can't get enough of talk about theater, and I'm sure that if you're listening to this, you can't either. So make sure that you check those out. You'll find them everywhere you get your podcasts. And if you haven't subscribed to this podcast, if you're listening on the web or you just came across an episode on Apple Podcasts, I would like to remind you that subscribing is the best way to make sure that you never miss an episode of Stageworthy. Subscribing is easy. Just go to Apple Podcasts or Google Music or Google Podcasts and search for Stageworthy and click the subscribe button. You can also find links for the show at both Google and Apple on the Stageworthy website. And if you feel like dropping me a line to say hi, remember that you can find Stageworthy on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram at StageworthyPod. And you can find the website at stageworthypodcast.com. And if you want to drop me a line, you can find me on Twitter and Instagram at Phil Rickaby, and my website is philrickaby.com. My guest this week is Andrea Donaldson. Andrea is the director of Nightwood Theatre's Grace, on now until January 26th at the Streetcar Crow's Nest in Toronto.
Yeah, so we've been rehearsing since December 3rd. Mm-hmm. We've been working in a way that's actually very conducive to life in general.
Well, that's good.
Which is that we do this might be too detailed, but
no.
We do 3/4, mm-hmm. which means that we have an agreement where we can work 5 days a week for 6-hour days or 6 days a week for 5-hour days instead of doing 6 days a week for 8-hour days. Mm-hmm. So it means that we can slightly lean out our process, make it a little bit longer, which is way better for life, for parenting responsibilities, for
but also as a performer, you get to digest a little more what's going on. It's not a compressed 2-week rehearsal and then you figure out everything, like all the important stuff when you're performing.
And given that we're all based in Toronto, it's affordable to do that.
Yeah.
It's not possible often when you're working out of town for everybody to be accommodated in terms of travel costs and stuff. But it's a lovely way. I think Nightwood tries to do it as often as they can because of allowing everybody's lives to work a little bit better. Yeah. You know, we're, of course, like actors and directors are prepping all night anyway for rehearsal the next day. So the
more time you can give people, the better.
Yeah, totally. So it feels like we've been rehearsing a long time. It feels like we're ready to be setting some levels today, which is great.
It's much better to feel like you're ready before you go into the rehearsal.
Yes, which isn't always the way. Yeah,
it's true.
Yeah, but in some ways, like you feel to whatever container you have, right? Yeah. If you have 2 weeks, you're going to make a good show in 2 weeks, which is the unfortunate thing because it is compressing and. In some ways, producers always win in that way because an artist is going to turn out the best thing they can. Yeah. But you can either do it under better conditions or worse conditions. Yeah. So fortunately, we're under really good conditions.
That's good.
Yeah.
That's good.
Yeah.
So what can you tell me about Grace?
God, I've been worried about this all day because there's some like every show has its own spoilers, but there's obviously one of the big airs of mystery around it is this anonymous playwright, and the playwright who is a real playwright in our city wrote this play and ultimately determined that they were better off to go anonymous in producing it as it comes to stage. So what can I tell you that doesn't give everything away?
What can you tell me about, just what is the story? What do we know within the first 5 minutes of this show? And what can we... What is the theme of the show?
Within the first 5 minutes of this show, we know there's a trigger warning. And so for your audiences also, there's a trigger warning that probably some stuff is going to come up in this conversation. We know that it's a piece that's written by two sisters. Slightly more co-authored from one than the other. And that it talks about... a young woman's sexual assault that happened in her life, but is not about any of the gruesome details about that. It is expressly not about the gruesome details of that. It's really about this four family members figuring out how to move on. And in fact, because it happened in the past, they already have moved on. So they're already quite launched into their true life, happy moving on kind of life, which is actually, they actually do have great lives. But I guess what the piece does is looks at how something like that might impact a family and how in their specific situation they went through that, and then also how they come out of that. But I guess one of the intriguing things about it is that the playwright herself determines at the top of the show that she doesn't want to emotionally invest herself in the show itself. She wants to be someone who's creating kind of a meta theatrical proposal. So this kind of a kind of untheatery theater that for which she's assembled facts and statistics and other research that will go alongside the project and put the pieces together, so that she's almost more of a facilitator, and that her sister, who was assaulted as a kid, that she has liberty to write whatever she wants and talk about her experience in any way that she wants, in a way that she wasn't allowed to in the legal process when they tried to bring him to trial. And ultimately, the legal system let her down, as it does the majority of people. Yeah. So it becomes this kind of like really, I think, surprising reckoning for the family, and actually becomes in and of itself a moment of healing, which I don't think the playwright ever expected in real life or within the making of the piece. But the actual making of the piece, one of the surprises of it is, it actually has brought us together. This thing that I thought was kind of like a cool project that I'm being super sensitive with actually turns into this thing where we all say things to each other that we never said, because we were kind of trying to protect each other. And actually in airing that, we're brought closer together. And also, I think from my perspective, it was actually really surprising in our first read through that I felt like, I don't necessarily have to caution survivors around coming and seeing this work as a retriggering event. But actually, this is a rallying cry for the survivors and allies who have any connection to sexual assault. Because, in fact, it is actually hopeful in an odd way. I mean, I feel like in theater we don't actually always make that much hopeful stuff, and I think my track record for making hopeful work is like actually not that strong. but every now and then when I work on a piece where we kind of go like, this is, I don't think all theater is meant to uplift us, but I think sometimes it is. And this piece is a real piece where it feels super appropriate and totally unforced at the end to feel like, you want to hold hands with your next door neighbor and know that we're all in it together. Not to be cheesy, but like I think one can say in this time that if one hasn't been sexually assaulted, then one who's proximate to that person has been. We know that it's a majority. We know that I have some like terribly eloquent quotes around statistics that point to that, and it's horrifying. But we're also living in a very exciting time of airing that and kind of like questioning the natural stigma we have around that type of assault, which is so shame-ridden.
Yeah, well, absolutely,
right?
Absolutely. But that's one of the ways that the perpetrator of the assault keeps control over the situation, because they're not shamed.
Yeah.
The person who experiences it.
Yeah.
The victim, for want of a better word, is the one that's shamed.
Yeah. Well, and legal professionals know that, and yet nothing changes, which is what's so, in some ways disheartening. I'm a terrible optimist, so I kind of feel like, we can only hope that the times that we're in actually lead to some rethinking and recalibrating of how we hold court and how judges hold court and how defense lawyers and prosecution deal with these kinds of trials.
There's a couple of things that I actually wanted to pick up on that you said. One of them, first off, that to hear that it's an uplifting, like that it's uplifting, because when you read a description of a play and it says that it's dealing with an assault, a sexual assault, and that sort of thing, you tend to brace yourself for a not uplifting experience. Yeah, and to hear that it has. That it's not what some people think it's going to be. Yeah, yeah, is a good thing to hear, I think. Yeah, for a lot of people who might be nervous, both if they're worried about being triggered, but also about not wanting to leave the theater depressed. Totally,
and it was actually became very obvious to us when we were assembling this family, when we were casting them, to be really considerate of that. And so, there were a lot of choices that I made in terms of who was playing the two sisters, Sarah and Grace. But particularly around Sarah, who's the sister who is really the author of this piece. She, in auditioning the women who came in, it was really key that this extraordinary person who was going to carry this role was able to both find the care and sensitivity of a family member who wants to do a project like this, who has also the kind of intellectual prowess to be able to deke in and out of ideas very, very quickly, and also the kind of self-deprecating humor around, doing this kind of unusual and very complex task, and also making us certain in the audience that within the first 5 minutes that we know that we're not going to be really uncomfortable for the next 90 minutes, So it was extraordinary, and we had all these amazing women come in, and we could have cast all of them. They were all extraordinary. But Rose Napoli, as a writer herself, actually brought this real ability to kind of write on the razor's edge, juggle all of those things without ever being glib and insensitive to the fact that it is about a lot of pain. Yeah. So it is about a lot of pain, but actually taking us through as a guide. When the playwright was writing this play, I helped develop this play from its infancy. When the playwright was developing it, I think it was probably like twice as long as it is now. Yeah. She was actually like quite absent from it, except that she had written herself as a character in the play, but more so as kind of an outside guide to it, who would come in with information and context and lead us on the pathway, kind of like beginning, middle, and end. And in our work together, I was really encouraging her to bring in a lot of the concerns that she had in actual life as a playwright around authorship and around not wanting to exploit her family, which is she was super conscious of and really respectful of, and so how to bring those concerns actually into the work itself, given that she's written herself as a character in her play.
Yeah, yeah.
So it was really interesting to see kind of like what that progression was for her, because she was so self-conscious of that. She was so, you know, in her first interview to come in and be part of the writing program that I run at Nightwood, she had a letter from her sister giving her blessing to do the work. So she was super, super conscious from the outset of it that wanting to write a play about her sister's assault it immediately comes with a whole set of problems.
Yeah.
And so it became actually really interesting in the work to go, okay, well, what if you're actually calling those out? What if you're actually calling out our concerns in the audience about all of the things that you're doing, and actually, you know, in your own kind of exorcism of why you're doing this, and really scrutinizing as an artist, why do you want to talk about this? Why do you want to put your family's pain on stage? Why do you want to, is it because you maybe thought you were a really crummy sister? Is it because you ignored her when all of this stuff was actually going on in her life? And so, you know, we don't need to see the perfect angelic protagonist sister. We actually want to see the sister who's really scrutinizing herself. So she did an extraordinary job of that, actually. And in fact, when her family came to a reading to see themselves on stage, it was, I mean, they're an amazing pack who've endured all of this and came out to support this work. And with which they're all interviewed in. So all of the text from mom, dad, and sister is all verbatim.
Okay.
It's only Sarah, our guide, who you know, kind of steps out and has opinions about things, or reflects on things, or is able to kind of speak with us in real time, really speak with us in the audience. But her full family came, and they witnessed 4 actors playing them in a tiny little room with no lights up and down, because it was a reading at Music Zones, and saw things that they had contributed to. You know, like, so for example, dad had been interviewed, and that was taken away and assembled into this larger thing, and then he sees himself being played by another actor, saying exactly his ums and ahs and whatever he said to his daughter in privacy. And so it just feels like we're in a bit of an infinity mirror. In terms of those reflections coming back and forth. And and it was, so I think even that experience of, like, the experience of making, the experience of talking it out was something. The experience of hearing it for the first time was something, and then reflecting together as a family after that experience, and then knowing that it was going to be produced. So instead of just a room of, 40 people, there's going to be, potentially 3,000 people that will see this work before it, could potentially tour or be picked up by another company in another part of the country or another part of the world. Like, it's kind of extraordinary.
Absolutely. One of the things that you mentioned was that you had all these wonderful actors who auditioned for the roles. Especially for the role of Sarah. Right? When you said that any one of them could have played the role, I'm curious from the director's point of view, like, how do you make that choice ultimately when you have a group of very talented people? How do you narrow that down to one? Because you have to. That's like the beautiful, fortunate, terrible part of my job in some ways. Well, this, just to take it back one step, the casting process for the sisters was very unusual for me. First and foremost, we, in trying to be really considerate about the confidentiality about the script, we didn't give it out. So that's unusual. Right? Like, how do you audition for a role if you haven't read the script? Well, we tried to give sides that were, that gave enough information, and you kind of can't really audition for this play unless you start with the first text, which is hi to the audience, right? So we had all of these extraordinary people putting themselves forward for roles that they didn't really know what the scope of it was. They had character descriptions and some sensitivity warning that I think most people deserve.
But because they didn't kind of know who they were really casting themselves for, they knew they were in an age range or should be able to play these two sisters in their 20s. What I decided from the outset was, if you're applying to audition, you're going to audition for Sarah or Grace.
Okay.
So slash.
Yeah.
So both of them. So I had sides for Sarah, sides for Grace, and then the third piece was I asked all the actors to create a movement piece that used one of the texts as an underscore, because I knew that pushing against all of this kind of fact and trial and all of these kind of hard, rigid lines that the piece also needs to really bust out in this really vivid world. And there are these portions of Grace's more poetic, prosy texts that welcome that. And so I needed to know that they could move, wanted to move, and also kind of see what their interpretation of this was, because I knew I wanted something, I didn't know what it was. Yeah. And so those are pretty unusual guidelines to start and audition with. And so, each person came in one by one and did Sarah, and then switched modes and did Grace, and then did this movement piece. So I guess, once we saw Rose Napoli, who auditioned for Sarah, or I guess for both, but we kind of went, okay, she's an obvious Sarah for a number of reasons. Then it became, okay, who is her sister?
Right.
And we left and thought about it, and there was something really important to me in the meta-theatricality of this piece, that the actors make no effort to make them look like what they're described to be, because the piece keeps reflecting back. This is based on a true story on the playwright's life, but this is also a construction in the way that any documentary has a lens, right? Yeah. And so it felt really important to me in the same way that the character of Sarah keeps reiterating, but this is a play. This is a play. And in fact, within the play says, my name's not Sarah. I'm Rose, playing a character that's... So it felt really important to me to make sure that the casting didn't look kind of right. I say bunny ears, air bunnies, or whatever they're called. And so, for example, in choosing her sister, I kind of went, well, I really want someone who is not the description, which is a 21-year-old, chubby, blonde, curly hair. Those are kind of the physical attributes that are described in the text. I want someone who is not those things, but who has the magical power of that kind of essence, who can play anything, who, just one of those real shapeshifter actors. Yeah. And then I was sitting here in this office, and Kelly said to me, "What about Michaela Washburn?" And I was like, "Yes, it's Michaela. It's Michaela." Michaela, I think she would be okay with me saying this, is like, well, she is in her midlife. She is not a 20-year-old woman, nor is she small and blonde with curly hair. And so I immediately got on the phone and I said, "Michaela, are you available during this time? Can I send you a script? Can we meet up?" And we, I think, met the next day at her dining room table, and she read a couple things for me, and we went from there. And then I was on the hunt for mom and dad. So it took me a long time to cast this play, much longer than it usually does. I do a lot of casting. So typically I'm able to just kind of go, okay, here are my top 12 thoughts. Depending on the thing, I'll see some others to kind of expand opportunity, to shake up my mind, to challenge myself. So this was a very different process in that, because it just felt really key to pick one person at a time and make sure that person was entirely confirmed, and then move on to the next piece of the puzzle.
another thing you mentioned really early on, going back to these first few statements, because there's so much to unpack. You mentioned about how you learned a lot. You've been learning a lot about the play as it's been rehearsing, about how uplifting it is and things like that. Has the play changed as you've been rehearsing it? Or has the script remained the same, or has rehearsal informed script changes and back and forth?
Yeah.
What's that process been like?
Yeah, so I would say, I mean, I work primarily in new play development, so I'm very very comfortable with risk. I'm the type of director who's comfortable with, and bring actors on who are comfortable with having lines cut and added up until our last 5-hour rehearsal before opening. That so usually that's the lay of the land, I would say. For this piece, interestingly, we have done very little tinkering, like an unusual absence of tinkering, I would say. There have been some. I would say that in this leg of the process with this play, it has more so been about. Because of some of the trial details, which we don't go too heavy into and don't get too bogged down in, but there's some intricacies where once you start getting intricate, it's like, how intricate do we get? Yeah. And how do we give people enough to kind of go breadcrumb, breadcrumb, breadcrumb. Okay, I got this. I can listen now. Yeah. And so there were a few things that were based on just the true story that were a little bit intricate, that we had to, do a few cuts and adds to make sure we're clear. I would say it's kind of been that teeny weeny. Yeah. The playwright herself has been in only twice because of life and logistical challenges. But it was very exciting when she first came in, and the actors, I think they would be fine with me to say that they were kind of terrified and nervous. I mean, it's very unusual to have an anonymous playwright come in and also to be performing. There's it's always an honor to perform for a playwright and to bring them into the room in new play development. And it's especially sensitive when you know that the person who's sitting across watching this run through or stumble through is someone who not only created the thing, but is actually in the thing. Yeah, yeah. So, Rose is looking at the playwright playing her. And her family's story is on display. So I think it was a very sweaty hand kind of. I can imagine.
Because, anytime that you are performing for the person who wrote the play, that's a thing. That's a thing. Yeah. And I get what you're saying. Yeah. Not only did she write the words, but she lived the words. Yeah. 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 It's got to be very...
Very strange. Yeah. And from the playwright's perspective, I mean, she was in awe of them. They're 4 extraordinary actors. And I think because the cadence of the speech is so natural, because it was caught from natural conversations, even for her own writing, which was curated, interestingly. But I think because the writing is of the mouths of these different people in her lives, she was struck by how uncanny it was to see these 4 people who are totally not her family, have not met her family, look nothing like her family, who are suddenly her family. So that was very reassuring. Yeah. Because that would feel really actually terrible to get it wrong. Oh, yeah. Yeah, absolutely. Like, that's not my dad. Oh.
There's a lot of things you really want to have somebody say in that particular situation.
Yeah. So no, it feels like it's been affirmative all the way along. Good. For sure.
So just to step away from Grace for a little bit, I'm curious. One of the things that I always like to find out about is what somebody's theater origin story is. Okay. So what is it that brought you into this theater world? What is it that made you want to do theater? How did you come to this?
Yeah. I mean, I think as a little kid, I was like really imaginative in the way that I think most kids are. But I definitely was cool with playing on my own and played a lot of, I guess, dolls, I would call it, though, like any figure could, like a pencil could become a character, like anything could become a character. So I played a lot as a kid. And then when I was quite little, when I was 8, my teacher at school, I grew up in Toronto, identified me as someone that she thought should audition for Claude Watson School for the Arts. Okay. So I did these weekend auditions in grade 3, which just felt like fun. And as a kid, I watched Fame. So I was like, sure, I'll go to Fame.
Yeah, absolutely.
And I got into Fame. So I got it. And then I was just kind of, just being a kid, but being a kid at a school for the arts. Yeah. So we were doing a lot of, it was a very multidisciplinary school. Mm-hmm. In grade 5, I was a visual art major. And then I started in grade 6. I switched majors and went into theater, to drama, and my school went from grade 4 to grade 13 because I'm old, so we still had grade 13 in Ontario.
I had grade 13.
Okay, all right, okay, we're talking the same language.
We're contemporary. Yeah.
And then in grade 9 I added dance minor. So I was like. It was kind of like I would have had to choose something else, but that would have been a bigger decision to not go into theater than to go into theater in a way. And then I moved out to BC and went to the School for Contemporary Arts at Simon Fraser, which was a little bit of kind of like closing my eyes and swirling my finger around and going, okay, I'll go there. But I just felt like I'm from Toronto. I want a change of scenery. I want a change of perspective. And I really did get that for sure. But it was a beautiful program that actually, their thrust was in devised work and in interdisciplinary work, which was kind of perfect for me because I came from holding all of these disciplines, but didn't really ever think about considering why one might put them together. Mm-hmm. And then I kind of became obsessed with that. So I was, in my earliest days, I was performing and creating and directing. Yeah. And I loved directing in high school. Paula Citron, who's a reviewer in the city, she taught at the school in grade 11 and 12. And so she taught me, she was part of that moment of learning that I like directing. And finally, when I started directing in high school, that's when I kind of went, oh, that's what's fun about all of this stuff. So like it's very telling, I always find. Yeah. Like the table work, which is almost exactly the same as an actor that you have to do as a director, except as a director you have to do it for all of the characters. Yeah. I hated doing it as an actor. Huh. But I love doing it as a director. So it's so, it's kind of interesting. But yeah, for a long time, I really wanted to assert doing the perfect triangle of being a performer and being a creator. Yeah. Mostly as a performer, I was interested in performing what I created. Yeah. So I didn't actually ever, I only did kind of one traditional gig as an actor where you get a script and you do the thing. Mm-hmm. But the last thing I really performed in Toronto, it was a huge, amazing, ambitious project that Theatre Direct did for Theatre for Young People, which was called And By the Way, Miss, and it was developed. There were 5 of us in the ensemble. We were co-creators, and there were 4 directors from the Urge Collective, which is like Fidesz Krucker, Catherine Duncanson, Linda C. Smith, and Marie-Josée Chartier. And Linda Hill at Theatre Direct brought them on to create this massive project. And we worked for kind of over 2 years in these different cycles of building it. And so that was kind of like, and we won Doras for it. It was great. But then I was like, no, it's not. I loved it. But I guess my desire for a particular kind of authorship that even as a playwright wasn't quite the right fit for me. I feel like all of that trajectory was about shaping my use of being at the seat at the table that I am when I direct. But, dramaturgy is a big piece of that. I don't like to do too much dramaturgy on its own. Mm-hmm. Usually I'm developing things that I'm going to direct. Yeah. It's not always, but most of the time. But I do feel like the type of performer that I was, the type of creation work that I was trying to do, ultimately, when I look back, I think that was all in service of the work that I do now as a director. But directing has always been the thing that's really spoken to me.
Because, I know what you were saying about how you were more interested in like developing work for yourself.
Yeah.
And working on that. And that's what you were performing as a performer.
Yeah.
I've been more interested in that
as
I get older.
Yeah.
I did a show that somebody else wrote at the Toronto Fringe last year, and I wasn't that into it because
you're saying this live right
now.
I
know, but it's I'm honest. Is it didn't give me what performing my own stuff gave me.
Yeah.
So I learned a lesson, and that was an important lesson to learn.
Yeah.
Have you completely given up on the performance aspect, or is it sort of on the back burner for now, or have you just fallen too much in love with directing?
I don't think I will ever act again. I don't think I have for over 10 years, maybe 12 years, 13 years. There's like, the thing that I love about it is the being in the momentness of it, and the like actually the communicating that your body does. That's actually what's most appealing to me about acting. But I have no, I can't. I mean, life is very surprising. I will say that, but I cannot imagine the circumstance that I would act again in. And it's not because I didn't have kind of the moment where that I started hating it or anything like that. It wasn't like I got too rejected or something like that. I never thought of myself as like normal in that way. Like I never aspired to do the normal acting thing. In fact, I never kind of aspired to do the normal directing thing. I kind of like, I feel like anything that's brought me onto a straighter path has been a kind of an act of semi-rebellion or something. Like even doing I did the Stratford masterclass in direction, where you do, for 2 years, you do the thing and you assistant direct and you do projects there. Yeah. And when I was interviewing for that, I just felt like, I'm just like this badass who's like, I've never liked Shakespeare actually, so here's what I'll bring, but I won't bring that. And, it was kind of this like impetuous brat. But even growing up in Toronto, I never grew up I never thought that theater, that Shakespeare or that Stratford was Mecca. I never thought of that as the thing to be working toward. And then it's interesting because my path has actually gotten narrow, not narrow, but more straight-laced. Yeah. And I don't know if that's just aging or opportunity or I guess part of it is like about 10 years ago, after I had my child, I got really sick. I had started having all these really weird symptoms. I don't know if this is going too far off track, but I was diagnosed with an autoimmune disease that I have a very mild case of. But at the time when it was being diagnosed, it was like, if it's the mild case, then you'll be okay. You'll just have terrible symptoms. If it's a bad case, then you could potentially have 3 to 5 years. So I really looked death pretty close in the face. And it made my priorities become crystal clear, especially as a pretty fresh parent. Yeah. And I don't know. I kind of felt like not stop messing around, because I wasn't messing around. All of my messing around was very fruitful messing around, but I really did feel like get serious about finding out what you are shitty at and go toward it and make it be more diligent. And so I feel like actually in being more diligent, because I was this kind of really, I'd say my work at that time was like, I don't want to put it down because it was its own beautiful, like a little bit naive in a way, but naivete is beautiful. Yeah. But it was really rich and really imagistic and really intuitive and really unencumbered by a lot of analysis and wasn't that like oppressed by like psychology and beauty was kind of at its center. And I kind of went, okay, that's all good, but where are you lacking? So look at that. And that took me to a lot of like pretty heady places. And It's not to say that there wasn't an amount of intelligence in the work that I was doing. It was just a very different kind of intelligence. So I really went hardcore toward, my mentors then really shifted. My mentors were like Peter Hanton and Chris Abraham and Richard Rose, who are all these, very intellectual, very male, very very detailed, very analytical people. And that the rigor of that was amazing for me. But then I came out of both of those kind of experiences and went, okay, now I'm just a brain in a jar. So what do I do now that I'm just a brain in a jar? And how do is there a synthesis to find between the two of those? So I guess that's kind of where I'm at now. I feel like I'm kind of going, okay, where's the risk? So, partially in this piece when I went, okay, I want to devise the movement. I want to be the movement person for this piece because that's actually going back to some of my more kind of truer early artistic impulses. What if I put together my now big brain that I keep in a jar and my body, and what happens if there's more of a synthesis in that? And that actually brings up these kind of beautiful, terrifying feelings of really, truly risking as an artist. So that's my story.
When you were, as somebody who didn't see Shakespeare, didn't like Shakespeare, what is it that made you go think about doing the directing program at Stratford? Yeah.
Well, at the time I was like, I remember calling Alan Dilworth, who had done it, and I was like, Alan, do you think I should do it? I don't know. It's not me. I guess I kind of thought, I was in this kind of mode of what am I the shittiest at? And I was like, okay, well, I'm scared. And what are you scared of? Yeah. I'm scared of, I think the real turnoff for me with Shakespeare at that time in my life was I always felt really reluctant to acknowledge a master of anything. And I felt like I felt really excluded by Shakespeare. I felt really like, everyone knows what everything means, and there's this secret language, and he's the best. Therefore, if you don't know the secret language, then you're a dummy. And I guess I kind of was just like, well, I don't like feeling like a dummy, so I don't like Shakespeare. So that was for sure part of it. But there is something that's kind of very there's the thing that I love about Shakespeare now is actually all the opposites of that. And so I actually feel like I'm pretty good at directing Shakespeare because of that. So I guess I went toward it thinking okay, there's a 50% chance that I will come out hating Shakespeare even more. Or maybe I will catch the bug. And if I catch the bug, there's nothing wrong with catching that bug. Yeah. I also, was smart enough, starting to get smart to okay, well, you'll be paired with one of North America's finest directors. Yeah. That ain't so bad.
No.
And get to do a project with company members. And, there's a real, the tricky thing about being a young director, I'm not so young anymore, but, in your late 20s, early 30s, it's really hard to, number one, have people take you seriously or have any money to do anything and be able to earn credibility. Yeah. So those two things are really tricky. You can't work with a cast more than 2 or 3 people because how do you afford it? So the opportunity of going to a place where I could work with 20 people simultaneously was okay, that's a big challenge for me. I won't get that anywhere else. Yeah. So, I guess it was, I was looking at what are you terrible at and what are you terrified of? And go do that. And what's the worst that can happen? And the great thing that happened was that I was paired with Chris Abraham both times on both big projects. And when you're there for a long time. Yeah. Those rehearsal processes, you preview for an entire month. So the first time I was there, it was almost 5 months, I think. And then the second year I was there, it was slightly shorter. But the first project we worked on was a Thornton Wilder play with a cast of I don't even know, 25 or something like that. And Chris is incredible. One of his real gifts, aside from being a really gifted director, is that he's a really gifted mentor. So a lot of assistant directing is observing, which is fair enough. That's like, you know, how the cobbler passes on their trade. Yeah. But he really behaved as though I would be called upon at any moment to step in, whether I would be or wouldn't be. So I sat tensely throughout rehearsals, ready to jump in, which made me a real ally for him, I think, but also made me have to kind of play pretend that I was directing the Shakespeare, the Stratford Company in this massive production. So, but the lucky thing was, in terms of working with him one year and then the next year, is that the first year I worked on a non-Shakespeare play, so I didn't have to face my monster yet. Yes. And then the next year I worked with him on Othello, and I got to apply the exact same principles around directing that work as I did to this work, which actually really took a lot of the scary out of the monster that I had, because I realized, yes, there's specific language, yes, there's a lot of research to do, as there is with every show, but ultimately I think it's still just about telling a story, and still just about intention, and still about people. And so now I'm not as, I have to do a lot of preparation, but I'm not scared of it. And I feel like because of my roots with Shakespeare, I'm feeling like a big dummy. I think I use that to my advantage now, and kind of go, okay, well, typically for Shakespeare, you want everybody to be able to come. Yeah. You want kids to be able to come, old people, smart people, dumb people. You want everyone to be able to take something from it. And so the kids and the dummies, like me, are going to laugh at the fart jokes and peeing on a tree. And the more erudite scholars who come and want to really appreciate the language, well, we can give them that too. Yeah. So the more you look at one text, the more, of course, references and words come up again, and also I kind of call bullshit on the things that aren't funny anymore. Like, well, so I mean, there's that kind of thing too.
There are a lot of them, and you have to figure out what you're going to do with them.
Yeah.
Just before we finish off, I want to go back to Grace for a second.
Please.
So you're going to head off to the theater today.
Yes. Thank you for reminding me.
just yes. To throw that out there.
Yeah.
And so this, you open next week, and as we record this, you open next week. What? A lot of times I'll say, what are you looking forward to about an audience seeing this? But I'll throw out another question for you as well. So you can choose to answer either, what are you most looking forward to about an audience seeing this? Or, what scares you most about an audience seeing this?
I'm going to take the first one. So, I'm excited. Well, there's a number of things. I'm excited about an audience from a selfish perspective. I'm excited that these actors get to play with the audience because, similar to like Every Brilliant Thing or a piece where there's actual contact. There's no one's called on stage or anything like that, but they do speak to the audience. That's their scene partner. So. There's only so far we can approximate that in the rehearsal process. Yeah. So I'm excited from the actor's perspective for that. And then I'm excited for the audience to feel seen, to feel like this is a piece that recognizes and honors something that I think most of us have touched on some level. So there's that. And then, I don't know, what I'm really excited about for this evening, we have a very kind of heavy tech process that is going to have to happen very quickly. And my designers could not be more prepared. They've been prepared for months, it seems. But there's a huge amount of projection in this show. And it's so, like, looking at it on the laptop, it is the most gorgeous thing I've ever seen in my life. So I cannot wait to hear audiences gasp with beauty, because it is going to be so lush. I'm excited. Well, I'm excited to make this thing that's been so inside my head for so long, to make it 3-dimensional and to make it 30 feet high. I can't wait.
Awesome. Thank you so much for this.
Thank you too.
This has been a Homebody Productions production.